All right, awesome. Thank you, Lori. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is the 2020 Census webinar for urban reporters. And also, if we have any tribes with us here today, this also applies to tribal reporters and how the census will affect your NTD report. So as Lori mentioned, if you do have any questions as we go throughout the presentation, feel free to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And then anything else, we'll also have some time at the end, hopefully, for questions. But if not, you can always follow up with your analyst or one of us presenting here today. All right, so as a disclaimer, the contents of this presentation are intended to provide clarity regarding existing requirements of the FTA and NTD. Please always feel free to refer to the statutes and statutes and regulations for these requirements themselves. The goal of this webinar is to review the changes to the NTD reporting process due to the anticipated release of the 2020 U.S. Census Bureau's urban area data, which is slated to be released in December of 2022. This webinar is designed to apply to full and reduced reporters in the rural module, as well as reduced reporters in terms of tribal reporters, which fall under that category. Okay, so here is the agenda for this afternoon. First, we'll be reviewing the changes to the NTD reporting process as a result of the census release and outline some resources available to you.
Melissa, I'm sorry. Can I interrupt you for a second? Yeah. We have some feedback that a participant is having trouble hearing you. They're saying there's a bit of an echo. I'm hearing it a little. I'm not sure if that's anything you can fix, though.
Let me see if I can give you 1 second, and I will try to fix that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, is this any better? I definitely have an echo in my room a little bit, but I am a little bit closer to the microphone. I hope that is a little bit more helpful.
It sounds better when you lean closer. When you first started speaking, there was still an echo, so I don't know how close you are, but I guess stay there if you can.
Okay. Okay, I will stay here, and hopefully this is a little bit better.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So we'll be reviewing the changes to the NTD reporting process as a result of the census release, outline some resources available to you. Then we will cover how census data is used in the NTD, and then we will review 2 NTD annual forms that uses your agency's areas and are tied to that census data. So that would be our B10 and our FFA 10 forms. Then we will briefly review the NTD serve rules for the Federal Funding Allocation statistics forms or FFA 10 forms. And then lastly, we will move on to an overview of the census task and how it will function in the reporting system, how that task and associated data will be validated and closed out by your analyst. Okay, so here is the contact information for the National Transit Database. If at any point you require assistance completing your NTD report in general, or if you have questions specific to the census task when that is released later this year, you can always reach out to your analyst. And if you don't know who your analyst is, or you have general questions, you can always contact our help desk email listed here at the bottom. We are open from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern time for that help desk. If you have any technical issues or system issues in the NTD reporting Appian platform, you can always contact the FTA IT help desk listed here in the middle of this page. As Lori said, my name is Melissa Conti. I am a rural and urban analyst on the NTD validation services team. And I'm joined here today by Matt Bonzak, our chief QA analyst, who will be presenting with me today. And then Lillian Pecoraro, our IT lead, is going to be supporting us by answering technical questions and generalized questions in the Q&A pod. So our contact information is listed here. You can reach out to any of us if you have questions about this presentation, or you can always contact your assigned analyst if you have agency-specific questions. In addition to our contact information, we also wanted to provide the FTA program contact. So here we have Tom Coleman, who is the NTD program manager. And then we have John Georges, who is the director of office and strategic planning and analysis. So now Matt Bonzik is going to review the changes to the NTD report due to the census.
Thank you, Melissa. So I'd like to start by talking about just an overview of the changes that are coming related to the census. So what's happening with the new census? The census is going to be releasing a new set of urban areas. And so that means that in some cases there will be areas that were formerly rural that will become urban because they go above the 50,000 population threshold. There will probably be 1 or 2 cases of urban areas becoming rural because their population decreases below the threshold. There will certainly be a lot of cases of urban areas expanding their boundaries or changing their boundaries. There may also be a few cases of separate urban areas merging into a single area. So what that means in NTD is that you will have to reevaluate the urban areas that you operate in once those new urban areas are released by the census. So you'll have to review your region, look at the maps of urban areas in your region, and identify ways in which their location related to your service has changed. So in the NTD system, you're going to receive a task. That task will allow you to complete the B10 and FFA10 forms using the new census boundaries. And users who are either CEOs, CEO delegates, or NTD contacts will be able to complete that task. The Census Bureau has announced that they will release the data in December of 2022, so about 2 months from now. All of the things that are necessary for NTD should come during that month. So that'll be the list of urban areas, including the population, land area. It'll include the maps and shape files of those maps. There are several other things released later than December, but those are all sort of technical. I don't think you'll need them for your NTD reporting. So how does that schedule affect your NTD reporting? Well, we launched our 2022 report year in September, just a few weeks ago. If you are an October agency, so typically that would mean that your fiscal year end is June 30th, then you have your normal due date of October 31st. And so at the time that that report is due, the census will not have released the data yet. So instead, after you submit your report, in December 2022, the census will release that data. Once the data is released, we'll have to do some tasks on the back end of the system to load the new data into the Appian platform so that it'll be available for you to select on the B10 and FFA10 forms. Once that's complete, early 2023, we'll launch the census tasks for remaining reporters. So not the October reporters, but those of you whose report is due in January or in April. As you complete your report year kickoff, that task will become available to you. And when is the task due? It's due when your NTD annual closeout deadline occurs. So for those of you whose initial report is due October 31st, that closeout deadline is March 15th. So you'll need to complete your census task by March 15th. So that should give you a good 2 to 3 months to complete it. If you're a January reporter, I believe the closeout deadline for you is May 15th. And April reporters, I believe it's June 15th, maybe June 30th. So when your annual report is due to be done, that's when your census task is also due to be done. So how does that affect submission of your report? So the original submission dates are not changing. They're still going to be October 31st for those of you whose fiscal year end is June 30th or earlier. The next group going up to the September 30th fiscal year end, your original submission will be due January 31st. And then the remaining agencies going up to calendar year fiscal year agencies, your report will be due April 30th. So those dates are the same as every other year. You can also refer to the policy manual to get a summary of what I just said about your due dates. You will have to complete all applicable forms in your annual report package, even if this is before the census task is released. So for those of you who are October reporters, what that means is your FFA 10 forms will not be available. You've probably noticed that already, that those forms are grayed out. You're not able to complete them. You'll have to complete all the other forms. Your financial and service forms don't require any census data. So those are due at the normal time. And then what'll happen is some of you will probably be done with your annual report by the time the census task is available. So what we'll do is we'll just hold that annual report open until the census task is complete. For others of you, the census task will become available while your report is still in validation. And so again, that will just become available to you as soon as we're able to get that data loaded. And you'll have to complete it before we can close your 2022 report. So some useful resources that you can find. The first link here is to the Census Bureau page. So this is the page where they'll be publishing the new urban area lists and maps once they're available. And then the second link here is the NTD specific page. So this is the page where we'll be publishing NTD related guidance related to the census. One thing I do want to mention here, one thing we'll be publishing on this page is a crosswalk of UZA codes to UACE codes. So what does that mean? What that means is in the past, NTD has always used the population rank as the unique identifier for each urbanized area. So for example, New York, urbanized area 1, Los Angeles, California is urbanized area 2, and so on. We're moving away from that because what that means is with every census, the population rank changes in many cases. And so the code changes from year to year. And we found that was sort of confusing and sort of difficult for data users. So we're moving to using what the Census Bureau calls UACE codes. And so that's a code that is created by the Census Bureau. It's a numeric identifier. And the numbers don't really mean anything. It's like a zip code. It's just numbers that stand for this urbanized area. And the advantage of that is that the UACE codes won't change from one census to the next. So 2020 will have the same set of codes as 2020, or as 2030, 2040, and so on. So let's talk about the NTD use of census data. Why does the NTD need census data? And we'll start by reviewing who reports to the urban module. So agencies that receive or benefit from 5307 funds, that's the Urbanized Area Formula Program funds, are required to report to the urban module. That includes agencies that have an asset, like a vehicle that was purchased with 5307 funds. So even if you didn't necessarily receive 5307 funds this year, if you have that vehicle that was purchased with 5307 funds and is still within its useful life, then you still have a reporting requirement. In addition, agencies that receive or benefit from 5311 funds, that's the Rural Formula Program, and provide public transit services within an urbanized area, are required to report to the urban module. So even though they're not receiving 5307, the fact that they're within an urbanized area means that they need to report. In addition, we have a few voluntary reports. So agencies that don't benefit from 5307 or 5311, but serve an urbanized area and report voluntarily, would also report to the urban module. So FDA is required to use the most recent census areas in its apportionment formulas. And there are two forms that are involved there. The first is the B10 identification form. This is the form where you just identify the list of urbanized areas and non-urbanized areas that you serve. And then the FFA 10 Federal Funding Allocation form uses what you've selected on the B10 form to create a separate column for each urbanized area and non-urbanized area that you serve. And so as the reporter, what you have to do is take your totals for the data on that form, vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, and so on, and split those totals among the different columns. So split them among the urbanized areas and non-urbanized areas that you serve. And the reason that that's so important is that FTA, when we apportion funding using the funding formulas, we apportion funding to an urbanized area or to a state, but not to an individual transit agency. So if you're serving the New York UZA, then your data gets combined with the data from all the other agencies in the New York UZA. That all goes into the funding formula to generate a single apportionment number for the entire urbanized area. And so if you're serving multiple UZAs, then a non-UZA or multiple non-UZAs, the FFA 10 form is how we make sure that each urbanized area, non-urbanized area, gets credit for the appropriate amount of service that you've operated. The FTA is required to use the most recent available census data. So that means that FTA used the 2010 census urban areas, starting with report year 2011 and going through report year 2021. Which is the report year that wrapped up a few months ago. Closing out the reports, I should say. And so that applied to the federal fiscal year 2013 through 2023 apportionments. And the 2020 census data, since we're expecting it to be released in December 2022, it's going to be used for the 2022 NTD report year. And so just to be clear, the way that this works in the formula is it's a sort of a 2-year lag. So what you report in report year 2022, which is based on your fiscal year 2022, that goes into the funding formulas for federal fiscal year 2024. So that means that the new set of UZAs, urbanized areas, will apply in the 2024 apportionment. It will not change the prior year apportionment. So 2023 apportionment was already completed using the 2010 census urban areas, and that will not change. The Census Bureau does like to tweak things a little bit every 10 years. 2010 was the last update. It was integrated into the NTD during 2011. The big change they're making this time is really just a change in terminology as far as we're concerned. So right now, for the 2010 census, the Census Bureau identifies urban clusters as an area that's between 2,500 and 50,000 in population. And then it becomes an urbanized area once it's over 50,000 in population. The Census Bureau is changing its terminology, so it's no longer going to use the terms urban cluster and urbanized area. Instead, it's using the term urban area, and that encompasses both of those types. It encompasses both urban clusters and urbanized areas. So an urban area now is any area over 2,500 population. So what that means for us is not much. The law, Title 49 of United States Code, Section 5302, defines what an urbanized area means for FTA's formula programs and defines it as an area over 50,000. So even though the Census Bureau is changing its terminology, the 5307 program still applies to areas over 50,000. 5311 program still applies to areas under 50,000. We're going to continue using the term urbanized area and the abbreviation UZA, even though the Z doesn't actually stand for anything, just for continuity and to make it clear that when we say urbanized area, that doesn't mean precisely the same thing that the Census Bureau does when they say urban area. So an urbanized area will be over 50,000. An urban area, which the census is using starting in 2020, means over 2,500. And rural areas will still remain any area that's not in an urbanized area. So anything under 50,000 population, we'll call that a rural area. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa. She's going to talk about the forms that will be related to the census.
All right, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. So we're going to go over two forms that you normally see in your annual report package that use census-related information and will appear in this census task for you to fill out. So the first is going to be our B10 identification form. So this is currently in your report year 2022 annual report, so you'll still see it there, but there are aspects of this form that you will need to update in the census task. So we'll go over step by step how to complete that census task towards the end of this presentation. But what I want to do first is just review the basics for the B10 and the FFA 10, which I'll cover next. So on the B10 form, this is where typically you would identify your primary urbanized areas and any secondary urbanized areas where your agency provides services. So this is what the B10 typically looks like for this demographic section in your normal report package. In the census task, we are going to ask that you complete the primary UZA and secondary UZA sections based on the new 2020 census data designations. So your current B10 form has the 2010 census urbanized areas listed in them. And part of what we are going to ask you to do during this task is to complete the primary UZA section and secondary UZAs, if that applies to you, with that new census data. After you complete the census task this year, the primary UZA will automatically be populated on your B10 moving forward as it has in the past. And then you always have the option to update your secondary UZAs each year, depending on which areas you serve, if that does change. The service area, square miles, and population shown here, those are typically on your B10 form. However, they will not be part of the census task. So you will not see that in the census task. It is just the primary UZA and secondary UZA sections that you'll need to complete. The B10 also has other information sections that are unrelated to demographics. So we're not going to go into details about those sections since those are non-census related. You should fill those out as normal on your B10 form this year in your report package. But if you have questions about those other sections, you can always contact your analyst and we can help walk you through that. Okay, so next we're going to cover the Federal Funding Allocation Statistics, or FFA 10 form. So on this form, this is where you will report the vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, ridership or unlinked passenger trips, and operating expenses broken down by each urbanized area or non-urbanized area or rural area you serve on the FFA 10 form. If you're a full reporter, you'll also see other fields on this form, such as passenger miles traveled or DRM or HIB as applicable. There's just a couple extra fields if you are a full reporter that you'll see. You complete one FFA 10 form for each mode and type of service that you operate, so you may have multiple on your report every year. The UZAs will populate based on your agency's B10 form on the FFA 10. So these are connected and it will pull in those appropriate areas so that you can allocate your data. If you provide services within one UZA or one non-UZA, that might apply to some of our tribes, you can report all of your service to that one area. So you would only see one column pop up on your FFA 10, which we'll look at a screenshot of in a couple slides. And if you operate in more than one area, then you'll see multiple UZA columns on your FFA 10 forms where you can allocate your data statistics to the different urbanized or non-urbanized areas. We will cover specific serve rules towards the end of this presentation as well, if you do operate in multiple areas. Okay, Here's an example of an FFA 10 with one urbanized area. So this is where a reporter only operates in one area. So this may be an urbanized area, or like I said, if you're a tribe, this may be a non-UZA or a rural area. So you would only see one column and one section here to allocate your data to. Now, if you operate in two areas, so say an urbanized area and the rural area of your state, most rural areas you're going to see 0- the state code. So here we have Oregon. So you may see that if you have multiple areas, you'll see multiple columns across your FFA 10 form where you can allocate your data between the different areas that you serve. On the left side of the form, you're going to see each data point that you need to report and allocate on the form. So everybody will have vehicle revenue hours, unlinked passenger trips, vehicle revenue miles, and operating expenses. And then, like I mentioned, if you are a full reporter, you will see other data points here, depending on the modes that you operate. And if you operate over fixed guideway, you'll have additional fields here on the left. The first thing you need to do on your FFA 10 form is select your UZA reporting method. So there are three options on the form. We have actual data, vehicle revenue miles, and other. If you select actual data, this means that your agency tracks 100% of your data points. So VRM, VRH, UPT, OE, PMT, if you're a full reporter. It means you track 100% of that data between all of the areas that you serve, so urbanized areas or non-urbanized areas. Actual vehicle revenue miles method means that your agency only tracks the VRM or vehicle revenue miles operated in each UZA or non-UZA. If you choose this method, the system will automatically allocate the remaining data points, so your hours, passengers, operating expenses, based on the VRM data that you enter in between those two areas. So it will automatically adjust once you enter in your split for vehicle revenue miles. The last option, other, that means that your agency uses some other methodology to track data between their urbanized areas that you serve. So you're more than welcome to do that. If you have an other method, you have to describe that method in the FFA 10 form, so we can review how you are allocating that information. Okay, so if you select actual data, this is an example of an FFA 10 where you select actual data, you manually need to enter all of the values for your data points on the left side of the screen. So you'll have multiple fields open up for data entry for all of your applicable urbanized or non-urbanized areas, as shown here. So you would enter in data into each of these fields, allocate your information between the areas that you serve. So in this case, between these two areas here. If you select actual vehicle revenue miles, you'll only see one field open for each urbanized or non-urbanized area on the form, because you only have to enter in your vehicle revenue mile split. And then the system and form will automatically calculate and allocate the rest of the information according to whatever you enter into these two fields here in terms of the percentage split. If you select other, like I said, you can allocate your data accordingly. So it will open up all of the fields for you, similar to actual data. And you can enter in your split. And then here is a box where you would be required to describe that methodology so that your analysts can review that. Some other examples, it may be another data point. It could be by passenger trips. It could be by vehicles. It may be a couple different things. So we just ask for a thorough description of how your agency is doing that if you do select other. Okay, so again, on the FFA 10 forms, agencies allocate all reported data between any UZAs or non-UZAs as applicable. We do understand that some agencies report between multiple states. So if that applies to you, you want to take that into account and make sure that those are represented on your B10 form so that your FFA 10 forms will populate accordingly. And like Matt said, reporting by area is important because it impacts the amount of funding that FTA apportions to each area in its formulas. So we do, this is a very important form. So for the census information and filling out this information, your analyst probably will have questions and just wants to make sure that the form is complete. And we will ask some questions, which I'll cover later. A quick tip. I'm going to go over two tips for the FFA 10 form. If your agency only provides services within one urbanized area or one non-urbanized area, so any of our tribes, you would want to select the actual vehicle revenue miles allocation or reporting method. And then that way you only have to enter in one data point on the form. So that's just for the ease of filling out the form. If you're only allocating to one area, it doesn't really matter if you select actual data or actual vehicle revenue miles. It just comes down to how many data fields you'll have to complete on the form. So I always just like to give that little tip. So you only have to enter one number if you have one area. And then the second one, this one is really important as well. When you are filling out the FFA 10 form, you want to make sure that your data from other forms, you want to make sure that this column matches the values that you're entering into for annual total. So if you're allocating across multiple areas, you want to make sure that the sum of those across each column for each UZA eventually add up to what you have here in the data from other forms column. When you save your FFA 10 form, the percentage under allocated will update, and you always want this to be 100%. So we want to make sure that if you're splitting data points across multiple areas, that they all together sum to your total that you have reported on your source forms. So the FFA 10 form pulls in your service data and your operating expenses data, and that comes from multiple forms. If you're a reduced reporter, it will come all from your RR20 form. And if you're a full reporter, it will come from your F10 service forms and some of your F30 operating expenses forms. So if you do change any of those source forms, so if you make an adjustment to your vehicle revenue miles, you want to make sure that you come back and update your FFA 10 forms to make sure that everything is 100% allocated. Okay, so next I'm going to turn this back over to Matt to review the NTD serve rules for the FFA 10 form.
Yeah, thank you. So Melissa just described to you how to use the FFA 10 form. So how do you select a method and make sure that you get the numbers in? But so the question is, how do you know what numbers to report? And so that's what the NTD serve rules are. They're rules that govern how you're allowed to split your data and allocate it between different urbanized areas and non-urbanized areas. So let's start with the easy case. If a service is entirely within one urbanized area or entirely within one non-urbanized area, then the data for that service needs to be reported to that urbanized or non-urbanized area. When you have service operated in more than one area, that's where it gets interesting. So one option is that you can determine which area is primarily served by the service, and you can report all the data statistics for that service or that route to the area that's being primarily served. So often that would be your primary UZA. You could also allocate the data between the two UZAs or between UZAs and non-UZAs using a reasonable and consistent method. So that means we're not necessarily prescribing a method. We're just saying the method does have to be reasonable. And it should be consistent. So you shouldn't change the method every year. You should use the same method every year unless there's a compelling reason to change it. So let's look at an example. In this example, we have a trip that's traveling between the Washington and Baltimore urbanized areas. And so one solution is you could report all the data to the UZA being primarily served. So suppose this is a commuter route and you're the Washington Transit Agency. So you're running this route in order to serve your UZA of Washington. then you can put all the data in the Washington UZA. You also could allocate the data between the two UZAs. There are a lot of different ways you could do that. You could use the actual vehicle revenue miles. So in this case, it looks like the boundary is about halfway through. So you could allocate 50% to Washington, 50% to Baltimore. Or you could use a different method. So for example, if 70% of your boardings are in Washington, then you could do 70% Washington, 30% Baltimore. Just has to be a reasonable, consistent method. There are, however, some special rules that apply when 5311 funds are used. So I'll go through this. First, I want to clarify that these rules apply by service. And when I say service in this context, what I mean is a segment of your total service that is receiving specific grant funding. So for example, if you're a demand response program, so you have a DR mode, and there actually might be several different programs within that, that DR mode. And so maybe one of those programs receives 5311 grants, but the other programs don't. So then these rules would apply to the program that receives 5311, but they wouldn't apply to the other programs. So these rules don't necessarily apply to the entire mode and type of service. They can apply just to a piece of it that receives a specific grant. So the rule is, first of all, if you have no funding from 5307 and you do have 5311 funding, then you need to report that data in the non-urbanized area. Similarly, if you have 5307 capital assistance and 5311 operating assistance, so for example, the bus was purchased with 5307 funds, but 5311 is actually reimbursing salaries and fuel and that sort of thing, then again, you would report that entirely in the non-urbanized area. If the service is funded both by 5307 operating and 5311 operating, then you need to allocate the data between the urbanized and non-urbanized area based on the proportions of 5307 and 5311 operating assistance. So for example, if 60% of the operating assistance comes from 5307, 40% comes from 5311, then you would have to allocate that between the urbanized and non-urbanized area, 60% urban, 40% rural. So now I'm going to turn it back to Melissa, and she's going to talk more about the task that's going to appear in the reporting system.
All right, great. Thanks, Matt. Okay, so we talked about the forms that have census-related information in them. And now we're going to move into talking about the actual task that you will receive in the reporting system and how that is going to work. So each agency will receive a task in the NTD reporting system and will complete the B10 form and any applicable FFA 10 forms with the new 2020 census data. So like Matt said, this will populate for any agency with a kicked off 2022 report. So you will see that as soon as it's ready, hopefully in December of 2022, a couple months here. And you will select your new UZAs or non-UZAs, whatever applies, based on the 2020 census designations. And then with those new areas, you're then going to complete your FFA 10 forms as applicable. So right now, if you have your 2022 report open, you may have noticed that you don't have any active FFA 10 forms that you can access through your annual report. All of the FFA 10 data that is going to take place in the census task based on these new areas. So if you don't see your FFA 10s in your annual report, don't worry, you will have a time to complete those in your census task once it's available to you. And I just also want to add here, obviously, we're a couple months out from that. You will receive notifications and information from your NTD assigned analyst. So, as this comes closer and we get more information and have a better idea of time frame, once that information is released, you will get information from your analyst via email on that. So we won't, just cover this and then leave you for a couple months. We'll let you know as soon as we have any information about when this will come out. And then we're always here to help you through those census tasks as well. So that was just a quick note. Right, so now we're going to review each of the steps in completing the task itself and what it's going to look like in the reporting system. So Matt mentioned this already, but the task will be deployed to any CEO delegates, or NTD contact user roles in the reporting system once it's available to you. So under your My Tasks tab, you'll see that there. So once you see that task, the first thing you need to do is accept the task in order to get into it and start working on it. I want to make a note here that if you accept the task as a user, the other users that had access to it will no longer be able to see the task. So if you are the NTD contact, if you accept the task and start working on it, your CEO user will not be able to see that task since you've already accepted it. It's just something to take into account before you start working on it and coordinate with your CEO or NTD contact users to determine who will be working on the census task. All right, so once you have accepted it, you'll first answer whether or not you need to make changes to your primary or secondary UZAs based on the 2020 census data. It will show your current primary UZA and any current secondary UZAs in the form. And in most cases, if there are changes to where you're operating or changes to your urbanized areas, we don't know what those changes are yet since the data hasn't been released. But if you need to make changes, you will select yes. This question on the first page here. Then once you select yes, you will be able to select a new primary or secondary UZA from the drop-down menus on the census task. If you select no, it means that your primary and secondary UZAs did not change as a result of the 2020 census data. So I would just take care to review your information and where you're operating to make sure that you're answering that question correctly if you do need to select new areas or if those areas have changed in terms of names and areas that are included. Okay, so once you indicate the area, so once that is updated, then you're going to click continue at the bottom of the task, and it's going to take you to the FFA 10 section. So based on those new areas selected, you will then fill out any applicable FFA 10 forms for your agency's modes. So you'll see here at the top, you have a question that says, do you need to make any changes to your FFA 10 allocation? Everybody should select yes. Since you have not completed any FFA 10 forms, since they're not available in your 2022 report, you have to fill out your FFA 10 forms through this census task. So you're going to want to select yes. And then you'll see little buttons here with any mode and type of service that your agency operates that has an applicable FFA 10 form. So I want to bring attention to that because you'll be on the same screen. But you may need to toggle back and forth between your modes and types of service. Make sure that you're completing the FFA 10 form for each mode and type of service. So you'll need to do that for however many apply to your agency. Okay, once you select one mode and type of service that you want to start working on, the next thing you're going to do is scroll down in the census page, and then you will see the UZA reporting method. You'll select that as normal. So whichever method you'd like to use that we already reviewed, those three options, you'll select that first. And then you can start completing your FFA 10 form based on that method. So if you, your new areas will populate in the section of the FFA 10. So if you have new urbanized areas that you operate in or any changes, you'll see those reflected in this FFA 10 section here. And that's where you can start filling out your information. Then what you want to do, like I said, is repeat this process for any other modes that you have. So once you're done with one mode, you'll scroll back up to the top and click back on these little buttons here and then go into the next mode and complete it. And there is a save button. I just want to mention that as well, that you can click to save your progress in the task. Okay. And then before we move on to the comments section and the rest of the task, I also want to make one note. The data from other forms here is 0. On your forms, it will show what you have entered in your 2022 annual report. So all of the data you enter for service and financial information on your 2022 annual report, that will pull into your census task. So that data will populate here, and then you'll work on allocating it as you normally would in your FFA 10 forms in your report package, but it's just taking place in a task so we can make sure that it's updated with the 2020 census areas. Okay, so once you're done filling out those two sections, you'll notice on the page there is a section for comments and attachments. So this census task is going to be validated by your analyst. And so it's going to look similar to the validation interface in the NTD reporting system, where your analyst may have questions or need clarification on what was submitted to us. So in this comment section, you will see a back and forth between you and your analyst if there are any questions, or there may be required revisions if part of the task or a data field were left blank. We may ask you to go back and fix that through the task. So that will happen once you submit the task, which we're going to cover in the next couple of slides on how to submit it. But once it comes to your analyst, we will review and then return to you if there are any questions or requested revisions. For the attachments, you can upload any supporting documentation here for your census changes if you'd like. Your analyst may also upload some attachments as well. Okay, once that is done, then there is a submit button at the bottom of the page on that FFA 10 section. So you'll click submit and you'll be taken to this confirmation page where you can complete the submission and confirm that by clicking the submit button again. So it's a little bit of a two-step process. You'll click submit on the FFA 10 page of the task, and then you'll confirm the submission of the task to your analyst on this page here. This will send it to your analyst to review, and we will go over the FFA 10 form and the B10 form information that you submitted. And we are going to be applying standard validation to this data. So what we normally look at on an FFA 10 form, we're also going to be reviewing here to make sure that your data from other forms is matching your annual total, and just overall making sure that the information is complete. And given the census changes, we may also ask you if there are significant changes to the services, the areas that you operate in. We may ask for further clarification or explanation on those changes. When and if the task is returned to you for any clarifications or changes, you'll receive an automated notification from the system that it's been returned to you through the NTD reporting system. Your analyst will also follow up with an email similar to how our workflow goes for the annual report as well. So you'll receive an email from your analyst if there's any further information required. Okay. And for the task closeout process, once your analyst has gone through the validation issues and there are no more questions, we're going to route that to our QA team for further review. And if there are no questions from QA, we will then send that task up to FTA for final acceptance. So once the census task is approved by FTA, the data submitted will be finalized and cannot be edited. So this is similar to when your annual report is closed out for the year. You cannot go back and enter or edit any changes on that data submitted. So I just want to make that clear. Your analyst will also make that clear to you that once this task is submitted, reviewed by your analyst and QA, it goes up to FTA for final closeout. That data cannot be changed. So make sure that you're just reviewing the values that you're putting in there. And if you have any questions about that, you can always work with your analyst to make sure that that is finalized before it goes to FTA for final closeout. Last thing is, once it is approved by FTA for the year, you'll see this in your form library. So similar to your annual report, you will be able to go in. It will be listed as an addendum to your 2022 report. And you'll be able to see what you reported for your FFA 10 forms and your B10 forms in that form library section. Okay, that wraps up our presentation. Like I said, more information will be coming on the census task in terms of time frame as we get closer to December, and that information is released by the Census Bureau. So don't fear, your analyst will be in contact with you. But in the meantime, if you're an October reporter, you can keep on working on your report as normal. And January reporters, still early, but your reports are available to you if you want to work on those. So everything else should be business as usual. And then once this task is launched, that will complete your FFA 10 forms and that B10 information with that new census data. So I hope that was helpful. Here is the contact information again for the help desk email, and then my contact information, as well as Matt and Lillian's, and Tom Coleman, the program manager at FTA. So if you have any questions, you can email us directly, or you can always contact your analyst. But the last couple of minutes, we're going to open it up for questions. So let me open this up. That's great, Edna. I'm glad you love Sarah. She's a great analyst. All right, and you're welcome, Suzanne. Yeah, any other questions? Whitney, I'll leave that one for Lori, but I do believe we will be posting a recording typically in a couple of weeks.
Yes, as soon as I have time to do a light edit and put it on NTI's YouTube page, it will be ready. This is the second webinar this week, so hopefully by the end of next week, I'll have those both posted for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lori.
Sure. Are there any other questions coming in? Steve wants to know about the presentation. Steve, there should have been a link in the email that gave you the login information to a copy of the handouts, which is the slides printed 2 per page. We don't generally give out the PowerPoint itself. So I hope that answer live. Does someone want to tackle the anonymous attendee question about the UZA?
Yeah, I can answer that. So as long as there's no 5311 funds involved, then you are definitely free to determine that the UZA is being primarily served. And so then you can allocate the entire service to the UZA. If there are 5311 funds involved, then you would have to go to the table that I discussed on, I think it was slide 40, about the ratio of 5307 to 5311 funds.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. We'll wait a few minutes for some other questions in case there are any. Thank you, Yvette. Curtis has a question about NTD, about an NTD contact accepting the task.
Yes, that's correct. So once it's accepted by a user, there is an option to reassign or to return it back. But once it's accepted, and if it's in somebody's view, so say the NTD contact accepts that, other users cannot simultaneously work on the task. So you will need to coordinate with users between within your agency to make sure that you all have that information ready whenever you're going to accept the task and start working on it.
Great. Hope that was clear for Curtis. I put a link in the chat box to the evaluation for this session, but you don't have to do it right now. I will send an email after, so you can do it later. We definitely would like your feedback. If you could take a few minutes, that would be great. Any other questions? No? Thanks, Curtis. Everyone appreciates that.
Thank you.
Always
Yeah, I
good.
just want to, oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who came today. I hope this was informative, but like I said, you know, your analyst will be there to walk you through the rest of it whenever this is actually launched. So more information to come as we get there in December, hopefully.
Great. I guess if there are no further questions, again, everyone's contact information is on the screen, so you can always reach out. I guess we'll wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for participating. A special thank you to Melissa, Matt, and Lillian. And again, you will get an email with the survey link. So just, we would love for you to fill that out. We love your feedback. So thank you to everyone, and good luck with all these changes and new things coming everybody's way. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Lori. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.